Mao Zedong, was born on December 26, 1893 and died on September 9, 1976. He is commonly known as Chairman Mao. He was a Chinese communist revolutionary who became the founder of the People's Republic of China, ruling from its establishment in 1949 until he died 27 years later. When Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev visited China in 1958, Mao held a meeting in his pool because he knew Khrushchev couldn't swim. Mao only did this because he felt the Soviets had disrespected him when he visited Moscow in 1949. During the Moscow visit, Mao had expected to be treated as a guest of honor, and he was insulted when he was only allowed a short meeting with Joseph Stalin. So, when Khrushchev visited China, Mao took his revenge. Mao held a meeting in his pool and suggested Khrushchev join him in the deep end, and gave him a flotation device. But Khrushchev struggled to float. In Khrushchev's memoirs, he tried to downplay the embarrassment by saying, "Of course I could not compete with him when it came to long-distance swimming." In 1956 Mao launched the 100 Flowers campaign. This encouraged people to express criticisms of national policy. But later he used it as an opportunity to target critics and send them to prison camps. Mao had said, "Criticism of the bureaucracy is pushing the government towards the better." Millions of letters were sent to the premier's office. People also shared their criticism through posters and rallies. Major complaints brought up China's low standards of living and the unfair privileges enjoyed by Communist Party members. It's unknown whether Mao had originally planned to punish the critics, or if he decided later to take the opportunity. In 1962, Mao started a sexual relationship with a 14-year-old girl. She was a member of the Chinese Air Force's cultural troupe that entertained Mao. Shortly after, she told her parents, and her father wrote an angry letter to Mao. The relationship lasted 5 years. The father had been a Mao supporter and was proud of his daughter for entertaining the chairman before he found out. A postman later gave the letter back saying it could be a death sentence for the father. The father changed his mind about sending the letter after hearing the postman's warning. Jiang Qing, Mao's wife, became angry about her husband's affairs. She told friends, "Why shouldn't a woman have male concubines?" They agreed. She couldn't stop Mao from sleeping around, but she could get even. And soon Mao's wife had a male harem of her own. But unlike Mao, she went for the classy people. Mao didn't use toilets unless he absolutely had to. Whenever he had to do his business, he would head out into the woods. Unfortunately, Mao was constipated most of his adult life. His third wife, his hen, had to give him enemas. Apparently even his feces were spun into propaganda. One writer said that during the Long March, Mao's bowel movements were a source of inspiration to the soldiers. Mao's favorite hobby was swimming. According to his propaganda ministers, he was the best in the world. In 1966, he did the annual Cross Yangtze swimming competition. He swam the Yangtze River, making the 9-mile swim in 65 minutes. That means that Mao swam at a speed of 3.8 meters per second, making the then 72-year-old man almost twice as fast as Michael Phelps. Unfortunately, the propaganda ministry lost the full video of Mao's extraordinary swim. Mao never brushed his teeth. Instead of brushing, Mao would rinse his mouth out with tea and eat the leaves. When his doctor suggested Mao use a toothbrush, he replied, "A tiger never brushes his teeth." And when it came to cleaning his genitals, he reportedly said, "I wash myself inside the bodies of my women." According to Mao's personal doctor, women that caught sexually transmitted diseases from the chairman were proud to be infected. Mao infected several women with the STD, trichomonas, vaginalis, and that the illness transmitted by Mao was seen as a badge of honor by the women, as a symbol of their relationship with him. In 1973, Mao wanted to export Chinese women to the United States. He offered to send 10 million. Mao believed sending the women would lead to bilateral trade between the two countries and would also solve China's overpopulation problem. He said China was a very poor country with an excess of women. He made the offer at a meeting with National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger in 1958. Mao introduces the Four Pests campaign, where he orders the extermination of rats, flies, mosquitoes and sparrows. But by killing sparrows there's an explosion in the locust population which contributed to the famine in 1959. Up to 45 million people died of starvation. Sparrows were targeted because they eat grain and fruit. The original idea was that killing sparrows would improve agricultural output. But people forgot that sparrows also eat insects. Meaning the extermination of sparrows actually resulted in lower rice yields. Chiang Kai-Shek was born on October 31, 1887 and died on April 5, 1975. He was the leader of the Kuomintang Nationalist Party and served as the leader of China between 1928 and 1949. He then moved to Taiwan, also called the Republic of China, in late 1949 after losing the civil war to Mao Zedong, and ruled with absolute power until his death 26 years later. The Constitution of Taiwan allows 2 terms in power, but Chiang Kai-Shek held on to power for 26 years, using martial law as his excuse. Some historians think he stayed in power because he thought that US forces would help him retake the mainland one day. Many nationalist supporters respect Chiang Kai-Shek as the founding father of Taiwan. But there are people who think his rule was unconstitutional, at best. Some Taiwanese have suggested that Chiang's monuments and statues are removed from places of prominence across the country. In Taiwan, the Kuomintang were responsible for the oppression of local culture, and the imprisonment of over 140,000 Taiwanese people. They were arrested for their perceived opposition to the nationalists. In Chiang's mind, anyone criticizing the party was a communist sympathizer. In late 1949 Chiang left China for Taiwan, where he set up his new government. He held the country under a permanent state of martial law, meaning he had absolute power. His reasoning for this drastic decision was that the Kuomintang was still at war with the communists on the mainland. He served in the Imperial Japanese Army from 1909 to 1911. He had moved to Japan in 1907 to attend a school in Tokyo. It was when he was here that the idea to overthrow the Qing Empire was born, and, when the Wuchang Uprising took place in 1911, he returned home to join the revolutionary forces in China. After Sun Yat-sen's death in 1925, Chiang Kai-Shek expelled communists from the Kuomintang and led a campaign against local warlords, giving him control of the 3 major cities of Canton, Nanjing, and Beijing. The removal of communists from the ranks allowed him free rein to give himself near absolute power over the majority of mainland China. Surprisingly, without the help of the communists, Chiang wouldn't have lasted long. It was actually the communists who convinced the officers to release Chiang and allow him to retake control of the government on the condition he agreed to stop his hate campaign against the communists and join them in the fight against the Japanese invaders. When the Chinese Civil War intensified after World War II, Chiang expected help from the West. But after a war against the Japanese and the Germans, the Allies didn't want to get involved in another war, instead wanting to negotiate a peace between the two, which didn't quite work. Some of Chiang's officers felt that he spent too much time worrying about maintaining his power in the party, when he should have been focusing on fighting the Japanese invasion in Manchuria. He already survived revolts in 1930 and again in 1933. But in 1936 some officers made the decision to take him prisoner with the intention of taking control of the army themselves. Chiang's fight against the Japanese and the communists made him some important friends. But the communist leader Mao Zedong was actually responsible for many of the victories over the Japanese. but Chiang ended up getting the credit from Winston Churchill and Franklin D. Roosevelt. Kim Jong-Il was born on February 6, 1941. He was the second leader of North Korea, taking over after the death of his father, Kim Il-sung, in July 1994. During his regime, North Korea suffered from an awful famine and had an atrocious human rights record. Kim also made a few half-hearted economic reforms, like opening the Kaesong Industrial Park in 2003. Later, in 2009, North Korea's constitution was amended to refer to him, and any successors, as the supreme leader of the DPRK. Kim Jong-il died of a heart attack on December 17, 2011, at the age of 70, while traveling by train outside Pyongyang. He was succeeded by his son Kim Jong-un, who is still in power today. In 1947 or 1948, Kim Jong-il and his younger brother Kim Man-il, nicknamed Kim Shura, drowned in the family's swimming pool in Pyongyang. There are unconfirmed Soviet reports saying that Kim Jong-il was responsible. Kim Man-il was born in 1944 in Vyatsko in the Soviet Union. The child's death is very mysterious. North Korean sources claim that in the summer of 1947, or 1948, Man-il and Jong-il were playing in the swimming pool of Kim Il-sung's mansion in Pyongyang, when Shura accidentally drowned. Some historians say that Kim Jong-il was responsible for this, either through not getting help or through holding Man-il's head underwater. Kaijongdong is a propaganda city that was originally built in the late 1950s by Kim Il-sung right on the border with the South. This was to display northern superiority to the South and encourage defections. Nobody actually lives there, but an extensive effort has been made to simulate an actual city, including lights on timers, and street sweepers making the rounds. The use of telescopes has revealed that the buildings don't have glass in their doors or windows, and some buildings are actually just concrete blocks that don't even have walls or rooms inside them. The city also has the wonderful distinction of housing the fourth largest flagpole in the world. According to state propaganda, Kim Jong-il had learned to walk when he was 3 weeks old, and started talking at 8 weeks. Later, while studying at Kim Il-sung University, he supposedly wrote 1,500 books over 3 years, and 6 full operas. These operas are apparently better than any in the history of music. Pyongyang media also reported that when Kim first played golf, he shot a 38 under par round on North Korea's only golf course, including 11 holes in one. Later, each of his 17 bodyguards verified the accomplishment. He then announced his retirement from golf. He was said to be an obsessive film collector, with a collection of more than 20,000 DVDs. His favorites included Friday the 13th, Rambo, Godzilla and anything starring Elizabeth Taylor. In 1978 he ordered the kidnapping of a South Korean film director named Shin Sang-ok and his wife Choi Eun-hee, in order to build up North Korean cinema. They later escaped to America while on a trip to Austria in the 1980s. German media reported in 2007 that Kim hoped to solve the North Korean food shortage by breeding giant rabbits. A German farmer who bred rabbits the size of dogs was asked by Kim to set up a rabbit farm to help annihilate food shortages. To get the ball rolling, the farmer in question sent 12 giant rabbits to North Korea. The rabbits were eaten at Kim's birthday party. And when Kim was on a train trip to Moscow in 2001, a Russian official said that roast donkey and fresh lobsters were flown to the train. Kim also ate the food with silver chopsticks. Kim was also the world's biggest private customer of Hennessy cognac. In North Korean history, Kim Jong-il was born in a log cabin inside a secret base on Korea's most sacred mountain, Mount Baekdu. The story says, at the moment of his birth, a bright star lit up the night sky, the seasons changed from winter to spring, and rainbows appeared. This contradicts the official records of his birth, which state the young Kim was born in a guerrilla camp in Russia, while his father was a resistance fighter on the run from the Japanese authorities. One of the reasons Kim Jong-il was so reclusive was because of his fear of flying. Kim rarely traveled abroad, and when he did, he traveled by train, once taking a luxury train all the way from Pyongyang to Moscow. His fear of flying may have stemmed from a helicopter crash he was involved in 1976, and later seeing his father's private jet explode on a test flight in 1982. According to state-run media, Kim Jong-il is the most beloved statesman in the world, and people in countries all over the planet celebrate his birthday with massive festivals. In the real world, most countries were confused by his bipolar foreign policy on important issues, like North Korea's nuclear weapons program. While preparing for the World Festival of Youth and Students in 1989, Kim Jong-il had disabled residents deported from Pyongyang. The government also distributed pamphlets advertising a drug that would increase the height of short people. Those who turned up to get the drug were sent away to different uninhabited islands along with the disabled in an attempt to rid the next generation of their apparently inferior genes. The Minju Joseon paper in North Korea reported that Kim Jong-il had created a new sandwich called double bread with meat in order to provide more food to university students. He then tried to mass-produce hamburgers to feed students and teachers, even though North Korea was in a constant battle with famine on a daily basis. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, commonly referred to by his initials JFK, was born in Brookline, Massachusetts to Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. and Rose Kennedy. He graduated from Harvard University in 1940 and joined the U.S. Naval Reserve in 1941. During World War II, he commanded a series of PT boats in the Pacific Theater and was awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for his service. After the war, Kennedy represented the 11th Congressional District of Massachusetts in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1947 to 1953. He then served as the 35th President of the United States from January 1961 until his assassination on November 22, 1963. His presidency was at the peak of the Cold War, and the majority of it dealt with thawing relations between America and the Soviet Union. Kennedy battled a range of health problems throughout his entire life. Sometimes it was so bad that he received the sacramental last rites a total of 4 times. The first was at the age of 30 in 1947, when he fell ill while traveling in England and was diagnosed with Addison's disease. The second time was age 34 in 1951, when he was suffering from high fever while in Japan. The third time was aged 37 in 1954, when he was in a coma following back surgery. The final time came on November 22, 1963 in Dallas after his assassination aged 46. These problems became a big issue when he attempted to enlist in the military in the lead-up to America's entry into World War II. Kennedy could not pass a proper physical examination due to his assorted medical conditions. Instead, Kennedy used the influence of his father, Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. to become an officer in the Navy. John's father persuaded his friends in the military to accept a certificate of good health, albeit a false one, from a family doctor. In 2002, a deep-sea explorer named Robert Ballard discovered the wreck of Kennedy's PT-109 boat 1,200 feet below the water's surface during a National Geographic expedition. Ballard said, "I'm very pleased because it was a real needle in a haystack, probably the toughest needle I've ever had to find." It's also worth mentioning that Ballard also discovered the wreck of the Titanic. Kennedy was a fan of Cuban cigars. In February 1962, he asked Press Secretary Pierre Salinger to get him a large supply of Cuban cigars. And quickly. When Salinger asked how many he needed, Kennedy told him, "About 1,000. And he wanted them by the next morning. The next day, When Salinger informed the president that he had managed to get 1,200 of them, he said, Kennedy smiled, and opened up his desk. He took out a piece of paper and immediately signed it. It was the embargo banning all Cuban products from the United States. While Caroline and John F. Kennedy Jr. became celebrities in their own right, John and Jackie Kennedy actually had 4 children. In 1956, Jackie gave birth to a stillborn daughter they had planned to name Arabella. On August 7, 1963, she gave birth to Patrick Bouvier Kennedy more than 5 weeks before the due date. He died just 2 days later. In late 1963, the bodies of both children were moved to Arlington National Cemetery to be buried with their father. Kennedy's choice of running mate was a last-minute one. At around 11 a.m. on the day a nominee was to be presented, Kennedy visited Johnson in his hotel suite and offered him the job, according to PBS. Robert Kennedy said years later that his brother offered the job to Johnson only as a courtesy, and then felt trapped when he accepted. John then sent Bobby back to talk Johnson out of it. Obviously it didn't work. With a net worth of about $1 billion, in modern money, when he took office in 1961, Kennedy held the record for the wealthiest president in American history. He was pushed down to second place when Donald Trump took office in 2017. Trump's net worth is around $3.5 billion. From James Garfield's inauguration in 1881, it was a tradition for incoming presidents to wear a top hat as part of the inauguration day outfit. Kennedy wasn't a fan of hats, but he went along with the tradition anyway, being the last president to do so. In 1958, Larry King was involved in a car crash with JFK, who was a senator at the time. In his autobiography, King wrote about how he had just moved to the area from Brooklyn and was so distracted by the South Florida locale that he wasn't really paying attention to the road. Kennedy apparently yelled, "How could you? Early Sunday morning, no traffic, not a cloud in the sky, I'm parked, how could you run into me?" King wrote. "All I could say was, Senator, do you want to exchange information from our licenses?" King wrote that Kennedy did eventually calm down, and he said he'd forget the whole thing if I promised to vote for him when he ran for president. I promised, and he drove away after saying, "Stay way behind me." In 1957, Kennedy was awarded a Pulitzer Prize for his book, Profiles in Courage. Kennedy is credited as the book's sole author, but questions have been asked in the years since then about how much of the book was actually written by Kennedy. And also how much of Profiles in Courage was written by his ghostwriter, Ted Sorensen. In 2008, Sorensen told the Wall Street Journal that he did a first draft of most chapters, and helped word most of its sentences. Dean Martin was born Dino Paul Crossetti on June 7, 1917 in Ohio. He was a singer, actor and comedian. He was one of the most popular entertainers of the mid-20th century and was nicknamed, the King of Cool, for his effortless charisma and self-assurance. He and Jerry Lewis formed the popular comedy double act, Martin and Lewis, with Martin playing the straight man to Lewis' slapstick act. He was also a member of the Rat Pack and went on to become a huge star in his own right in nightclubs, music, films and TV. Throughout his life, Dean was a heavy smoker. He was diagnosed with lung cancer at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in 1993, and was told that he would need surgery to prolong his life, but he refused it. He died of acute respiratory failure resulting from emphysema at his Beverly Hills home on December 25, 1995, at the age of 78. The lights of the Las Vegas Strip were dimmed in his honor. While Martin is better known as an actor and singer, he was an amateur boxer once upon a time. He fought under the name Kid Crochet. His short career got him a broken nose, a scarred lip and a lot of broken knuckles. Out of his 12 bouts, he said that he won all but 11. He shared an apartment in New York City with Sonny King, who was also starting in show business and had no money. They apparently charged people to watch them bare-knuckle box each other in their apartment, fighting until one of them was knocked out. When he first started singing, he changed his name from Dino Crossetti to Dino Martini. But there was another popular singer named Nino Martini, so he then changed his name for a second and final time to Dean Martin. Dean wasn't a big reader of conventional books, but he loved comics. He would be too embarrassed to buy them himself, so he'd have Jerry Lewis buy them for him and slip them to him in private. He only read one actual book in his entire life, which was Black Beauty. Martin was terrified of small or enclosed spaces. He flat out refused to ride an elevator and actually walked up 18 flights of stairs instead. Even though Dean had a reputation for living it up, he actually hated parties. He hated them so much that he called the police on a party his wife was hosting. He was upstairs watching TV and the party got quite loud. Martin then called the local police pretending to be a neighbor and said that there was a loud party going on at Dean Martin's house. The police actually came and broke the party up because of his call.